inshallah ta'ala, when we go back to final Q&A. Okay, and so inshallah, I would like to invite our next speaker. I don't know if his cat's going to be joining us for his talk or not, but inshallah, Dr. Jonathan Brown will be speaking next. Just a quick biography. Dr. Jonathan Brown is the Director of History and Islamic Thought at the Yaqeen Institute, and he's also an Associate Professor and the Chair of Islamic Civilization at Georgetown University. He has written extensively on the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and on the science of Hadith. His PhD from Chicago was on the canonization of Bukhari and Muslim, and he has this book also. Just a plug. I mean, he has a new book that's coming out soon on blackness in Islam as well. But he has this book on Hadith, the Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam's legacy in the medieval and modern world. And so he has an expertise on this topic, inshallah. And he will be speaking about some of the contentions that people have brought around, moral concerns within the Sahih of Imam al-Bukhari, and some issues with regards to that. Bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So over to you, Dr. Brown.
Hey, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah, habib nasta'in, wa salatu wa salam ala sayyidil mursaleen wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Thanks for inviting me. This is not my cat that's on my lap right now. This is my friend's cat. So I had to come. Actually in Seattle right now. I had to come to Seattle to do stuff, deal with some stuff. So I'm my friend's house, which is why I'm on a bed and not in like my office or anything. But yeah, then he has these cats, and I love cats, but and these ones are nice. Like they just want to sit on you and get petted and stuff. So this is a nice kind of cat. They're not troublemakers. But anyway, yeah. So thanks for inviting me, and I just want to make a correction, not because for my ego purposes, but just so that I'm actually a full professor at Georgetown, not associate professor. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that since there's no way for me to get promoted anymore, I don't have to worry about behaving myself. I mean, I'm not, I can speak without fear of not getting promoted or whatever. Yeah. So Bilal's talk was really great. I love hearing from him and reading his work and hearing about his work. He's made some. I think he might be the only. Well, yeah, maybe the only person I know who's actually added something, except for well, okay, he's one of the few people I know who's actually added something, a piece of information to our knowledge about Bukhari in like his there for 1200 years Muslim scholars have debated about who Imam Muslim is talking about in his Sahih, about the person he's criticizing for requiring direct evidence of direct contact between narrators. And some theory was that was actually Bukhari, Muslim's teacher Bukhari, but that doesn't make a lot of sense because Muslim speaks about this person like very harshly, and we know that Imam Muslim had a lot of respect for his teacher, so it didn't really make sense. But then Dr. Bilal came up with the argument that, and I think it's actually correct, that this was actually Al-Karabisi that Muslim was talking about, which actually makes a lot of sense. So, mashallah, that was a terrific discovery and contribution to really like a 12. Imagine like there's a debate going on for 1200 years, and then you actually like kind of add something to that debate. I think that's really an honor. About Imam Bukhari's fiqh, it's interesting. I think another thing that I think he has a unique opinion on is that he doesn't think that if you're doing pilgrimage that you can scratch your body. He doesn't think he seems like to say that you're not allowed to scratch yourself, which I think is pretty unique. I don't think that's a known fiqh opinion in like the schools of law. Cat hair in my mouth. Okay, so I think one of the things about the Sahih that's so interesting is, as Dr. Bilal was saying, it's an enormous book. I mean, so I've translated about like half the book now, and it's really difficult to translate. It's a very, very intense book. It's like I mean, two things. One is the hadith, the complexity of the hadith transmissions in it is extremely high. Uh, uh, and sometimes you'll see that some of the existing translations of the Sahih will they just translate like kind of one hadith for every issue. Like for example, Bukhari will most of the time have two or three or four narrations, if not more, of a certain hadith in his book at different points, either at the same chapter or scattered throughout the book. And a lot of, I think, as far as I know, that the translations that exist, they only kind of will, they don't usually translate these repetitions, but it's actually in looking at the repetitions, you see the complexity of what he's doing, and not just what he was doing, but the complexity of this hadith tradition that he was part of, where they will, they'll collect and collate different transmissions of a hadith that sometimes differ only in very subtle ways, but those subtle ways really show you, one, their attention to detail, two, how those subtle differences can really show difference in memory or different recollections or context, or how they kind of add or subtract to a debate. It's really important, I think, to note those subtle differences, because that's really where you see the excellence, I think, of this tradition. And like whatever you think, I mean, whatever somebody wants to say about the Hadith tradition or about it, I mean, it's simply undeniable is the complexity and the attention to the complexity and attention to detail. And I think the methodological rigor and awareness behind this book is undeniable. Like it is simply not denied. It cannot be denied. I mean, you can debate. You could sit around and debate whether you think the prophet really said this or they thought Salam or said that, or whether or not, etc. Like you could have that debate, fine. But this you cannot debate the incredible sophistication of this book. And it's not an outlier, right? Imam Bukhari's book is not, um, it's not kind of head and shoulders over anything else. It's not like he was the only person who did this, and everyone was just blown away by this unprecedented, work of art. It's not like he's Mozart and everyone else are these kids, scribbling on music sheets or something. I mean, he's really one of many people writing in this way about these issues. He's very good, and his, I think, work is the best of its field. But it's really not an exception. It's more a representation of a tradition, and you can't deny. I mean, it's as sophisticated as any book that any human being has written, as far as I know. I mean, as far as I know about history, the history of the human race, as sophisticated as I think anyone's written. It's just incredible, and I challenge anybody. I mean, just keeping up with what he's doing is a challenge. I mean, it's not. It's not. I mean, it's. I would say it's almost impossible. I mean, it's impossible for me. You need like scholars like Ibn Hajar or Khatib Baghdadi, Qadi Iyad, or Anwar Shah Kashmiri. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens of scholars in Islamic history have devoted their lives to just trying to kind of flesh out and keep up with what he did. And I can't even keep up with their efforts to keep up with him. So like as part of my translation, I read Fath al-Bari as I go, and I read Saharanpuri's Sharh as well, and I look at the kind of the different recensions of Sahih Bukhari, different riwayat, and I mean, just doing that is like a life project. I mean, really, if I were to take it more seriously than I do, I'm doing the best I can, but like, it would take your life to do that. Yeah, so he's just an incredible scholar, and I don't think you see that unless you really look at the book in full, not just like reading translations of snippets of it. The complexity is kind of stunning. It just leaves you stunned. That's what I would say. The other thing I would say is that it's also, Imam Bukhari is, I don't think, when you say, oh, he sort of, I mean, I'm not saying anyone here is saying that, but like he really is part of a bigger system. He doesn't he's not an exception, as I said. He's not he's very, very, very skilled, and everybody knew that, but he's not um he wasn't a star above like, this ocean of mediocrity or something. Like he was, and you see that because in some ways, I know this is I'm probably going to get quoted and by this, and there's going to be another like Twitter attack on me, and poor Awesome is going to get attacked. But I mean, I want to make it clear I'm not comparing Sahih Bukhari to a political tell-all in the era of Trump. Now the cat left, so I can put this on my lap. But in some ways, I think it's useful. Like it's if you imagine you read one of these like tell-all books from politics, where I probably have these in the UK, where let's say um, I don't know what's that guy Dominic Cummings. Let's say Dominic Cummings writes a book about number 10 Downing Street or something, right? And so he'll be referring to all this stuff and all these people and alluding to all these things and making these references. And if you went to the bookstore and you got this book and you read it, you'd be like, oh yeah, I know what I remember this, I remember that, I know what he's talking about here. It's just sort of floating in the ambiance. But if you were to go get that book in 50 years or 10 years or even 20 years or 30 years or 100 years or 300 years, you would be like, what the heck is this guy talking about? Like what like trip to this castle, what orange haired blonde, I mean, you would have all these references that you would just be you would feel like you were stepping into a discussion that you were completely unaware of. And I think that's how the Sahih is. I don't think I don't think anybody could deny this. It's you're stepping into a bunch of debates that he and other people are having in the mid third century of the Hijri calendar. So let's say the 830s to the 860, to 830s to the 860s, right? You're stepping into this, and some of those debates we know about, some of the stuff he explains, but a lot of that you get dumped into discussions that you and of course if it's sort of unfortunate that Bukhari is very polite generally, so he doesn't, like most scholars, right? He doesn't say this idiot says this, like Muhammad ibn Fulan, who's so stupid I can't believe it, says this, or like he's very polite. He doesn't refer to who he's talking about a lot of the time. He doesn't. He'll kind of he'll elliptically reference things. So you don't have, sometimes you don't know what he's talking about. He doesn't. It would be helpful if he told you, but he doesn't because he's very polite. Or he assumes that his reader knows about it. Like when he's sitting reading the Sahih in Baghdad or in Bukhara or in Nishapur, he was confident that he was just as when I'm talking, right? So I just said Dominic Cummings. Who the heck is that guy? Maybe in 100 years no one's going to know who this guy is or care, right? But like, or Trump tell all. I referenced all these things that we all know what this is because we're alive at this time. We know about these debates. But if you were coming in a dozen or centuries from years from now, you wouldn't know what I was talking about. Would you only an extreme specialist would, and only then maybe with some degree of speculation. So that's really the nature of the Sahih. And this is not my opinion, right? This is not Jonathan Brownson gets stuff because he's uneducated or something. And I guess we're sharing this screenshot. I didn't do that. So it's not my opinion. Like this was what Muslim scholars had to deal with even in the 2 centuries. So people like Qadi Iyad, in the who died in 1149, I think, right? And Khatib Baghdadi, who died in 1071 of the Common Era, or Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, who died in 1449, right? So these, for really the scholars who were first writing about Bukhari, they also have the same problem. Like they're like, oh, what is he talking about here? Like, why is he making this reference? Who's this debate involving? So that's actually one of the things that commentaries on Sahih Bukhari have to deal with, is like actually making sense of his comment. So I think Dr. Bilal mentioned this, but the Sahih is actually not a hadith book. It's not. I mean, it doesn't. It's Bukhari's take on on Islamic law, theology, history, hadith sciences, right? Oh, sorry about this. So it's like Islam according to Imam Bukhari. So the his opinions and everything are given in the sub chapter in the abwab, right? So in the abwab titles, which are like the within a chapter you'll have sub chapters. It's called abwab, bab abwab, right? Means doors. So those are the he'll sometimes they can be uh, you know half a page long. Sometimes they can be one sentence, and they can be half a page long. Sometimes they can be if you I mean, I remember one I translated. I think the translation was about 2 or 3 pages long. That's just his chapter title. Because what he does is he'll give you, let's say the chapter on, judges' rulings, and then on the subchapter it'll be like the chapter on the judge, um, not knowing, not ruling by things in his own knowledge or something, and then he'll have and that this companion, Ibn Abbas said this, and that Ibn Omar said this, and that Ikrimah said this, and it's narrated from Ibn Ishaq that he said this, and then he'll give like a Quranic verse, and then it'll be this enormous long list of opinions, and you sort of have to read this and figure out what is the point he's trying to make uh, by listing all these different um, opinions or these different pieces of evidence. So sometimes he won't. Sometimes he'll say, "This is my opinion," or this. He'll make it clear this is what he's arguing. But sometimes you just have to figure out what he's arguing from all these opinions, and they can be, as I said, you can have a page sometimes of this material. Oh, now the cat's leaving again. Something happened. He may have heard that there's food being served or something. So yeah, so it's really like the Sahih, and then so the hadiths in the book are actually just his evidence. So imagine I write a book where I say, I'm going to tell you everything I think about Islamic history and Islam as a religion, Islamic thought, Islamic law, and theology, right? So I give you my chapter title with my argument, my subchapter title, and then I give you a Quranic verse and like a companion opinion, and then I list 3 hadiths. Next chapter, next subchapter, my opinion on cell phone use, and here's a Quranic verse, here's like something a companion said, and then 4 hadiths, and then next chapter on whether or not you can use Zoom or something, right? Same thing. So that's what the hadiths are just the evidence that I'm laying out, one type of evidence. Because remember, in his chapter titles, he has Quranic verses, he has companion opinions, he has successor opinions, he has early scholarly opinions, he has et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all sorts of material. And the hadiths are just the part of the evidence. So actually, Bukhari's book is when we use it as a hadith book, we're just picking his evidence from his book and citing it as hadiths. I mean, they are hadiths, right? But we're using the book in a way that wasn't the original purpose of the book. Now that doesn't mean that we're misusing it or something. It's fine to do that, but it's just that the nature of the book was not like as a hadith reference. So someone like Imam at-Tirmidhi or Imam Muslim's books are much more reference books. They're sort of like, here's all the hadiths on this topic. Here's all the hadiths on that topic, right? And that those are much more just almost like what we would understand as reference books of hadith. Okay, so yeah, that's I think what I wanted to say about his book. And I don't know. I mean, it's just a mind-numbing work. I don't think I don't know. It's hard to believe that he could have done this in 10 years. It's hard for me to believe that anybody could do this book. It's just so his mastery of this material is beyond my conception. Like he doesn't. And look, I'm not saying this. I'm not doing some kind of Muslim, rah rah, like pom pom cheerleading thing. I think anybody who read this book would think this. I think someone could be just like a godless atheist who finds other human beings to be generally, just disappointments. I think if they sat down and looked at this book, they would be their jaw would drop. It's a really, really stunning, and the level of, and again, he is not exceptional at all in this way. Like, the attention to detail about, this narrator transmits this hadith, and in this version it has this wording. Hey Clark, I'm fine. I got coffee earlier.
Did you?
Yeah.
You have a lot more to go, or you?
I don't know. I'm not sure. I don't think so. Sorry, my friend is talking to me. This is the owner of the cats who've been sitting on my lap. Now he woke up and now they're excited about their actual master to be around instead of me. So and then he'll say, this other narrator narrates it, but with this detail, this missing detail. And it's incredible. Like, that means he was kind of presiding over this ocean of information, and then just selecting a piece and then selecting another piece and then telling you this piece differs from this. But it's like, just to follow that is really hard. And then to imagine sitting there without computers or databases or anything, and just sort of from memory going through all this material, and then finding it's so consistent. I mean, one of the things that's really interesting is, like, if you look at, the material is consistent through, so other scholars will be citing the same material before and earlier, or before and after Bukhari, and then you see the same details also represented there. So he's not just making this stuff up. Like, he's not sort of doing some kind of Jorge Luis Borgia simulacrum, performance of imitating a hadith scholar and like being like, Ibn Fulan said this, and no. He's like, this stuff is corroborated. This material is corroborated in other sources, so it's really incredible. Okay, that was what I want to talk about in terms of this book. Then I wanted to say, okay, then the other thing is people, and again, people attacks, as Awesome said, people attack Sahih Bukhari because, Bukhari is seen as kind of representation of the science of hadith criticism and collection. So, if you can kind of undermine him, you sort of undermine the ability for people to make claims about things the Prophet said and did, and that allows people to sort of either discredit the Islamic tradition or to free themselves of it. And so you see kind of two types of people, right? There's the kind of just people who are skeptical about Islam in general, and then you see people who are, Muslims who don't really want with hadith, and they find them obnoxious, or they find them backward or something. So that you tend to see this approach from them. But I mean, in some ways, I don't think this is fair, right? For a couple of reasons. One, because, and my question to these people would be like, what did the Prophet do for like 23 years? Was he just sitting around, staring at like rocks on the ground or something? I mean, you had to say something. I mean, you don't this person is teaching and leading for 23 years, and I guess pretty fairly can presume that he was actually talking to people and saying things and teaching them things and giving rulings, and right, and that people were obsessed with recording recalling what he said, because I mean, for one piece of evidence, we have the Quran, which is textually intact from the mid 7th century. So they were definitely obsessed with preserving that. I mean, there has to be some record of people recalling things he said and did. So what is your answer? I mean, you're just going to say that nothing. We have no record of what the Prophet said or did. Um, okay, I understand. You don't like this hadith, or you find that hadith backward, or okay, all right, fine. Like, okay, let's say he didn't say this one. I mean, what about the hadith that talk about the Prophet came out of his house and like washed his face? It's like, oh, is that also false? I mean, what's your problem with that hadith? He had, like, at some point in his life, he no doubt came out of his house and did something like washed his face or looked up or looked down, right? I mean, some of these memories have to be, something has to have happened. And what's our basis for just rejecting? The vast majority of material in Sahih Bukhari or in Sahih Muslim or any of these books is not controversial material, right? It's in effect kind of mundane descriptions of something that a person is doing, in the sense of like how he prays or how he eats or how he walks, right? Or things he says about teachings that are not controversial, like uh, how do you know when the iftar time has come? Uh, or the Prophet, somebody made a mistake about whether the sun had set or not, and do you have to make up your fast after? I mean, this is not something you can kind of get morally bent out of shape about. Okay, so I think that it's important to note that, like, that most of the material in this book is not something that is part of some kind of human civilizational debate over morality or something. Okay, the other thing that I was asked to talk about is because as I said, the reason why, and I know this is, at least a couple of years ago, there was a kind of a kerfuffle about the reliability of Sahih Bukhari, and i.e. the extent to which we know that it actually comes from Imam Bukhari. And some people said that we can't actually trace this book back to Imam Bukhari. I don't think that's accurate. I think we can definitely trace it back to him. But the motivation for this was this hadith in Sahih Bukhari about Aisha being being 9 years old when the Prophet consummated his marriage to her. And I think this is very ironic that sort of the person making this argument was trying to say, I can't believe someone thinks Aisha was only 9 years old, and there's no evidence for this. And look, even Sahih Bukhari, we don't even know it goes back to its author, let alone back to the Prophet. And my answer to that question is, like, what do you think you're accomplishing? But let's say if you took Sahih Bukhari, you found every copy of Sahih Bukhari in the world, and you just burned them, threw them in the garbage, right? You would still have this hadith about Aisha's age in many, many, many other hadith collections. Like, this is not something that Bukhari himself transmits alone and no one else transmits. So I wanted to share, you guys can share the screen now, because we were trying to figure out this earlier. Okay, so this is just a chart I did of the hadiths about Aisha's age, and you can see that there's different colors, and the colors of these metans, these texts of the hadith, actually correspond to the change of transmission. So you can see, you can find in Sahih Bukhari, Sunan Nasa'i, Sunan Darimi, Sunan Suwaid, Sahih Muslim, Musnad Abu Ya'la al-Mawsili, Sunan Ibn Majah. Where is the Musnad Ahmad ibn Hanbal, the Musannaf of Abdul Razak Sanani, the Sunan of Sa'id bin Mansur, right? And this is an extremely widely transmitted hadith. And the different metans actually match their isnads. What does that mean? Okay, so let's say you had like this red metan appeared with the red transmission, but also with this purple one. So let's say this purple one he married me at 9 and I was with him for 9 years. And then one of these versions, let's say the one from Ibn Majah that goes to Ibn Majah and not to Nasa'i, said he married me when I was 7 and consummated when I was 9. So imagine one version of the purple has the purple and one version has the red. That would kind of there's a fly in here. That might be an example of what
Muslim scholars would call ittirab, or kind of problemicity, or what modern Western scholars would oftentimes refer to as, evidence of forgery, right? So if you have different chains of transmission that are not consistent with what they're alleging to transmit, then you have an argument that someone in there is like fiddling with something, or going back in time and like inserting things and put in people's mouths. But what's interesting here is that the different versions, the different wordings, which all have the general or same argument, right? He married me when I was 6 years old. We consummated the marriage when I was about 9 years old. This is generally what you see in all the different transmissions, is that they're actually consistent with their chains of transmission, which suggests that there's not someone going back and like manipulating this evidence. One thing you hear and you'll find based on Muslim hadith criticism, and then modern Muslims who don't like this hadith will bring this up, is they'll say Hisham bin Urwa, when he moved from Medina to Kufa, that his transmissions when he was in Kufa became prone to mistakes. And yes, actually, you can see most of the transmissions of this hadith actually go through Hisham bin Urwa. And yes, he was in Kufa when he made these transmissions. So, in fact, we could say, like, yeah, let's take all this. So just imagine, like, everything that's coming from him and just delete it. If this were a PowerPoint, I could just do that, but this is an image. So imagine just everything here is deleted. Here's the thing, right? And let's say this very long, it's chain of transmission to Mosul. Let's delete that one. Let's delete this one, Ibn Majah. Okay. Here's the problem. This isnad here, Urwa to Zuhri to Ma'am ibn Rashid to Sanani. This is not only the earliest book. So Sanani dies in 211 Hijri. So around, maybe 820s of the Common Era. This is one of the earliest books we have. And this chain of transmission, Ma'mar to Zuhri to Urwa bin Zubair, has been studied. Even Western scholars like Harold Matsky have argued that this Zuhri is not like making stuff up. That he's generally Ma'mar and Zuhri. That transmission is, they're not forging material, especially legal material, right? So they're passing on kind of accurately what they're hearing. Before them, we don't know what the case is. That's what a Western scholar would say. We don't know whether this goes back to the Prophet or not, but definitely Zuhri, who dies in 124 Hijri, so he's studying with people like Ibn Omar, he's Anas bin Malik, he's a successor who meets the longest lived companions. So before him, you're getting back to the time of the companions of the Prophet, like, for example, Aisha. So Aisha died, I think, around 60 Hijri, right? So she's, and Urwa is her nephew, right? So Urwa is her nephew, and Urwa is the teacher of Zuhri. You're getting back to the time of the companions of the Prophet with this material, with Aisha. Again, Aisha's talking about her own life. This isn't someone else talking about her. She's recalling her own life about her marriage to the Prophet. So I think my suspicion is that even a Western historian who's very skeptical of hadith, I think would probably say this report about Aisha's age was in circulation, like it was people were repeating it and transmitting it in the time of Aisha herself, like in the mid to late 600s of the Common Era, I think. One, I think this report could be dated back to, within decades, certainly within a decade or 2 decades of Aisha's own life, if not during her life. And second, this is not controversial, right? So, if you had a report where it said, Ali should have been the first caliph, or Abu Bakr was the correct choice to be the first caliph, you could say, Muslims are having this debate over this, who's going to be the successor to the Prophet, and there's some people who are supporting Ali and some people who are supporting Abu Bakr, and so we can imagine somebody saying, I'm gonna forge a hadith that says that Ali should have been the first caliph, or I'm gonna forge a hadith that said Abu Bakr should be the first caliph. Like, you could understand that's at least an argument, but there's no debate that I've ever heard of where people were saying let's forge a hadith that says Aisha was 9 years old because we want to say 9, or one says, no, let's do it 10, or let's do it 18. So there's no debate about this. remember, I mean, you can read about this if you read my book, Misquoting Muhammad, but this debate about Aisha's age doesn't even the people who were sitting around during the time of the Prophet in the centuries after his death. So his opponents from Quraysh, early Christians who are writing polemics against Islam, like John of Damascus, who died in the 720s, medieval Christians writing polemics against Islam. None of these people mention Aisha's age. None of them say, I mean, by the way, they actually do say the Prophet, that he was like perverted. They say he was sexually obsessed with people, that they bring up the Zaynab issue. They bring up also they even bring up the fact that he saw Aisha in a dream and then became obsessed with her and wanted to marry her, allegedly, right? But what's up?
I'm gonna make you coffee.
Okay, thank you.
How do you like it? Black
I like black coffee.
You want black?
Yes, thank you. My friend is making me coffee. He's so generous. So my point is that they focus on the Prophet's sex life to attack him. They even bring up Aisha as part of that, but they don't bring up her age. When is the first time they bring up her age? In 1905. In 1905. So my point is that there's no evidence. There's no reason to think that somebody would make this forgery, like for some purpose. Then you could say, well, it was a mistake. Okay, well, if it's a mistake, but it's sort of insane, why would someone not correct this? Why would someone be like, this can't be right? You know, so for example, there's instances, like for example, in one hadith about when the Ramadan fast is when the Ramadan fast is revealed. So the companion who is narrating this hadith was not Muslim when Ramadan was revealed. So he became Muslim later on, and he says in the hadith, when the Ramadan fast was revealed, this happened. So you could say, wait a second, like this doesn't seem, how could he have seen this? But I mean, Muslim scholars noted that from the very early period. They say, wait, this guy wasn't Muslim enough. So how he must have heard this from somebody else, or they definitely noted that. So they notice when there's like some kind of error that's creeping in, or something that's like raising question marks about, wait, something's going on here. But they don't say this about this hadith. What they say in Imam Tabari's history is he says, when the Prophet married Aisha, she was too young, like i.e. too young for intercourse. So they waited for that. Asma was 10 years old and she was 27 in the first year of the Hijrah. She also died in Hijrah when she was 100 years old. I don't know. What is this person? This is Dr. Imam Hamasha is saying this. I'm not trying to be a jerk when I respond. I just don't have like a lot of time to do this, but I would say I don't really think this is all derivative material. Okay, what I'm presenting here is Aisha talking about her own life. This is Aisha recalling her own life. Like that's like me saying, when I was 12, you know, my parents took me to Disneyland. Now you could say, Professor Brown, you know, maybe you don't remember correctly. You know, you were actually 13 or you were actually 11. Okay, maybe I was 10, maybe I was 12, and I was 11, I was 13, maybe I was 14. But you're not going to get mixed up between 9 and 19 years old, or 9 and 18 years old. So you don't have whatever other evidence you will bring up about, well, you know, Aisha was this much older than this person, and this person was born in this year, and then that year was the same thing. This year happened, and therefore, blah, blah, blah. Those are all massive derivative arguments. And by the way, the data for those claims about when, you know, Asma was born, or how much older she was, and so and so, this is all much less reliably transmitted than this hadith that I'm showing you. Look at the number of narrations. Look at the number of narrations. Look, I would love it if, by the way, if somebody doesn't think Aisha was 9 years old when she got married, that's fine. No one's gonna not be Muslim because they don't believe this. This is just a detail. So, you know, whatever. But I think it's much more reliable historically than the other arguments that are made about her relationship to Asma in terms of age and how old Asma was when she died and what year she died. Okay. Okay. So finally, the last thing I'll say before I go is that, and it's funny because I have a guilty pleasure, which is that I like, I think Bill Maher is really funny. I know he's an Islamophobe. I know he doesn't like religion. I know he doesn't like Islam, but I don't know. I have a guilty pleasure, which is I like watching Bill Maher. Now, though, if my wife's watching this, this is not true. I'm what I just said is a lie. Okay. Hopefully my wife stopped listening at this point and I can say, yeah, so I have a guilty pleasure, which is I like Bill Maher. I don't like Bill Maher. I like some of his jokes. Trying to dig myself out of this, right? Like, okay, so anyway, a friend told me that last week on Bill Maher, his whole kind of final discussion was about presentism, which I find hysterical because, this is the kind of stuff I mention in my books and no one would care to understand what it's about. But there's this, comedian with lots and lots of viewers that he's talking about this academic idea. I was so happy that this was getting this kind of airtime. So presentism is this belief that kind of the present day views of the world are kind of normal and representative, and so we are the way human beings should, and everybody else in history kind of just was backward or didn't understand or kind of was just a less evolved version of us. And so we're the kind of culmination and the correct version of what humans should do and what humans should think. Now, so Bill Maher is very skeptical about this. He's kind of saying how we want to go back and cancel, like we think, Friends, we shouldn't watch Friends. We shouldn't watch Casablanca. We shouldn't watch all these movies because they're not woke enough or something. And, that we're sort of holding all of history to our own super woke standards. So I agree with him about this, but I think where I disagree with him and the general idea about this is that a lot of times when people criticize presentism, what they're really saying is, let's not blame people in the past for not understanding what we do. They were just kind of less, they were sort of, when he actually makes this allusion, he says, we shouldn't blame ourselves for, dressing badly when we were teenagers. Like we shouldn't blame ourselves for going back and seeing the way we dressed in the 1990s and saying, how could we ever have said this or dressed like this? Like he's basically saying we were younger versions of ourselves. We don't know what we know now, but let's not blame ourselves for that. What I would say is not actually change it. I would say human beings aren't a species that's maturing. Like it's not like humans 1,000 years ago were stupider than us. They were just as intelligent. They were just as physically capable. They were just as mentally capable. They were just as morally capable, right? They were in every way as able as we are. So this argument of kind of maturation, I just don't think works. Like what I would actually say, if you're critical of presentism, you shouldn't say, let's not blame ourselves in the past because we were younger and didn't know. You should actually say, the humans 1,000 years ago were just like us. They were just as aware as us. And so what we should actually do is say, we shouldn't be so confident about our claims to know what's right, because other humans who are just as smart and aware, and maybe even smarter and more spiritually aware than us, disagreed with us. So presentism is not about not blaming the past. It should actually make us humble about the present. It should make us much more humble about ourselves and our own views. And I would then, just to give you some evidence, like, the average age of marriage in, let's say, like, Republican Rome or Augustan Rome, well, women were able to get married at like 12. Average age of marriage for elite family would be like 14 years old. And even people like Montesquieu, he died in 1755, say that, women in hotter areas like the Middle East or the kind of the Mediterranean area start puberty younger than women in Northern Europe. And, I was just, you're just reading about this the other day in the newspaper. One of the causes they think in the U.S. now for like a lot of teenage mental kind of psychological problems is that people are going through puberty 2 years younger now than they were like 20 years ago, and that their bodies are chemically and minds are chemically maturing before their sort of socialization has caught up to that. So they're kind of becoming mentally and hormonally aware of all these social cues and issues around attraction and beauty and stuff, but they're not really mature enough socially to handle that. So this is very important. Human beings, the range of onset of puberty in human history is enormous. So in the like for example, into through the 1700s, the average age for the onset of menstruation for a woman was 18 or 19 years old in Western Europe. In Northwest Europe, the average age for the onset of menstruation for a woman was 18 or 19 years old until the 1700s. Isn't that incredible? I mean, that's so when in the 1200s in this what's called this Statute of Westminster in England, they passed a law saying that sex with girls under 12 is statutory rape. That's one of the earliest laws we have about statutory rape. But a girl of 12 years old in 13th century England, today it would be like a 6-year-old in terms of, because the average age for onset of menstruation in Northwest Europe at that time was much later. So this would be a girl who is still at 12 years old, is still 6 years younger than the average age for the onset of menstruation in her time in place. So when we go back and we read like Montesquieu talking about, women in hotter climes tend to menstruate earlier than in colder areas, you might laugh at that and say, oh, what kind of pseudoscience is this? But actually, he's probably correct. Like and this is what we know from British travelers in India in the late 1500s and French travelers in India in the 1600s. They all note the same thing. They see girls get married here in India when they're like 5, 10 years old, and they consummate the marriage when they're 9, 10 years old. So they know, they're like, people in these other areas are sexually active much younger than in Europe. Same thing, even in the 1700s. This is what this one British explorer named Bruce, who travels actually to try to find the source of the Nile. He actually goes to the Hijaz and Arabia in the 1700s, and he notes this. He says, like, women are getting, women in England get married at this age, and in Arabia they get married much younger. And he's not like upset about it. It's just an observation about like how they, how their bodies mature. So I think that instead of saying, reacting with shock about, the prophet getting married at a younger age, or Aisha getting married at a young age, we should actually recognize that we shouldn't take what we think is normal and just apply it to human history, because this is, not only arrogant, but it's also, you're causing yourselves problems. Like if you expect everybody in human history to think and act and react like you do today, you're going to be constantly, panicking or constantly feeling, alienated from your own species and your own history, because of course they didn't think, they didn't react like we do, because, historical circumstances change, right? And we know they do because of all this evidence that I've just given you. And in fact, until the early 20th century, even Western people who were sitting around trying to find things to criticize the Prophet Muhammad for didn't criticize him for Aisha's age. And if you look at, like, for example, Washington Irving's biography of Muhammad from the 19th century, he's the guy who wrote the like Sleepy Hollow stories, by the way. He mentions the Prophet's marriage to Aisha and that she was very young. He said women mature at different ages in that time, in that area. He didn't even think it was something to make fun of. By the way, because the average, or the age that women were getting married in America in the 19th century was also, you also had people getting married in their early teens, 9, 10, 11, 12 years old. The age of consent, I think in Georgia, in the US until the 1910s and 20s was only 10 years old. Anyway, so that's what I say. Presentism shouldn't make us or kind of make us accepting but patronizing and condescending toward the past. It should make us humble about the present. Okay, that's my shtick. You can unshare the screen. I guess you can have. Oh, my wife's taking my kids to Chuck E. Cheese. Okay, you guys ready to? So I'm gonna have to go in a few minutes. So maybe I can answer the questions now.
Okay, that's fine, inshallah. So we'll do that. We'll do that then, and then we'll bring Mufti Muntasir in, because I think Mufti Muntasir has some interesting takes on this as well. So the question I had off the back of what you said, and I think, is you have an article that you've written on matan criticism. So this idea that there are things contained within the hadith that don't conform to the human reason. The ulama of hadith have their own principles for dealing with this, right? And so I was wondering, that's what people are now trying to utilize to argue that those hadith that don't agree with modern liberal norms, these hadith need to be wiped out, and that then pointing skepticism towards the whole hadith tradition because of their attempt to enforce liberal norms onto the hadith tradition and what is contained within. So I just wanted to ask, what would be the technique or the process that a traditional hadith scholar would use in trying to analyze a hadith that he might not feel conform to human reason, and obviously how massively it differs from modern attempts to use presentism to analyze the hadith literature?
Yeah, so I would say that it's not the it's not that they have contempt for reason. I think that they're just much humbler, right? So they, like, for example, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, I mean, like a good example that always comes to mind for me is this hadith in Sahih Bukhari about where the Prophet says there's 2 months that have Eid in them. Shahra Eid la yanqusan abadan. So there's 2 months of Eid that are never naqis. They're never incomplete. Now, from what we know about, what does it mean for the month is naqis? It means that it's 29 days, not 30 days. So, and then the Prophet says there's Ramadan and Dhul Hijjah. So these 2 months, the hadith apparently seems to be saying there's 2 months that are not naqis, that are not incomplete. And what hadith scholars did is they were like, wait a second, of course Ramadan can be 29 days, right? So they immediately they do compare hadiths to other hadiths. They compare hadiths to the Quran. They compare hadiths to reason. They compare hadiths to empirical observation. But instead of just saying, oh, well, this clearly is just a mistake, or clearly it's a forgery or something, they'll say, like, well, what could the Prophet mean here? Like, we've looked at this isnad, we think that it's fairly reliable that the Prophet said this, so let's actually try and figure out what he means. So they say, okay, well, maybe it means that both those months won't be 29 days in the same year, which is interesting. But I think that I went back and looked at a bunch of Hijri calendars, and there were some years when Dhul Hijjah and Ramadan were both 29 days. But so they said, well, maybe it means that, like, there's 2 months that even if there's 29 days, you're still going to get the full reward for, like, fasting during that month or good deeds done during that month, right? So they're not so quick to throw stuff out. If the isnad is weak and the content is problematic, then they'll just say, oh, well, like, forget about it. I don't have to worry about this, right? But if the isnad is strong and the content seems problematic to them, instead of just throwing it out and say, oh, isnads are stupid, or, they'll actually try. And by the way, sometimes Imam Suyuti, Burhanuddin al-Bajuri, Ibn al-Jawzi, huge scholars, Ibn Taymiyyah, if they come across a hadith, even if the isnad is strong, but they just it is unacceptable to them, like they cannot reconcile it, they'll say we can't accept this. It happens. There's two hadiths in Sahih Muslim, for example, where a number of major Muslim scholars, like Imam Asyuti, have said we can't accept this hadith. They just don't. They said it's not as strong, but simply we cannot reconcile the metin with what we know from the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet. They can't accept it. And Mufti Muntasir actually, in his work on the height of Prophet Adam, has a great example of this. So, okay, the last thing I would say to answer this question is, I think if you're going to do metin criticism of hadith, we've established this is okay. Like Muslim scholars did this, and Muslim scholars said sometimes we can't explain this hadith, even though we think the isnad is strong. We simply can't really accept it. This is Sunni scholars have done this. They're reluctant to do it. They don't do it easily, but they have done it. But if you're going to do it, it's a lot stronger to actually have some kind of precedent for doing that, in the sense that if you're the first person to find a hadith to be like, for example, about Aisha's age, like you're the first person, you're like, oh, I think this is false. This can't be the case. I mean, that's suggests to me that it's more about your sensibility than about the hadith. If, by the way, you can find scholars 1,000 years ago who had the same reaction, that's actually a stronger argument. So Mufti Muntasir, in his article on the height of the Prophet Adam, he found this terrific piece of evidence, which is I think it was Muhammad bin Tahir al-Maqdisi, who died in 1113 of the Common Era. In he's just mentioning that, he says people don't understand what this, like they don't understand this. Like the people that hear this hadith in the mosque about the Prophet Adam, that human beings have been shrinking since the time of Adam, that Adam was 60 cubits tall, and that human beings have been shrinking since then. He says, like, people don't understand that. They don't really get it. And so that's actually an interesting piece of evidence showing it's not just us who have action, it's previous people 1,000 years ago. And whether or not it's appropriate to do metin criticism of hadith is another issue, and Mufti Muntasir is much more knowledgeable about this than I am. But in that case, at least it's not your generation, who's having this problem. This is actually like something that human beings have, listeners, and have been reacting with for many, many, many centuries. Okay, is that good?
That's perfect. Thank you so much for that. I don't think there are any other questions on that specifically. But again, the critic who problematized Sahih al-Bukhari, I don't know if I'm allowed to bring up. He had a single narration. The hadith of Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, of that he had the Bani Israel assumed that he had physical abnormalities about him, and so he goes for a bath and the rock steals his clothes. I don't know if you know which one I'm talking about.
Moses?
Yes, in the Musa. And then that one was another hadith used to say, look, that's actually denigrating the status of prophets. And prophets are, by definition, have to have certain characteristics by aqidah. Therefore, how can we accept this hadith? And there should be a rejection of this hadith. I don't know if you have a response to that specific contention. But if not, then
I mean, I remember what you're talking about. I can't remember look at my friend is like giving me like a nesting table. They're so generous, man. One cup of coffee.
Now you're about to speak.
Can you guys hear me? Sorry, this my computer's flipping out. So what I would say is, like, that kind of issue is almost like a non-issue, because there's so many. Sorry, my computer is really flipping out. I don't know why.
We can hear you.
Yeah, it's saying my computer